Jasmine's champagne glass froze midway to her lips as the restaurant manager approached their table. "Mr. Washington, I'm deeply sorry for the misunderstanding," he stammered, face ashen. The couple who demanded the black man's removal from the VIP section suddenly recognized the restaurant's famous owner. Before we dive into this incredible story of assumptions, prejudice, and sweet vindication, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to catch more jaw-dropping true stories of people who learned their lessons the hard way. Now let's get into how this explosive situation unfolded. The evening had started so promisingly for Jasmine Reed. At 31, the marketing executive had spent years climbing the corporate ladder at Reynolds & Klein, marketing carefully navigating office politics and putting in 60-hour work weeks. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. After 3 rounds of interviews, countless late nights preparing presentations, and outmaneuvering 2 other candidates, she had finally secured the associate director position she'd been eyeing for 2 years. Her boyfriend, Derek Foster, a 33-year-old investment banker at Meridian Capital, had surprised her with reservations at Sapphire, the crown jewel of Atlanta's fine dining scene. Not just any reservation, he'd somehow scored a table in the Azure Room, the exclusive VIP section limited to just 8 tables. Reservations typically required booking months in advance or connections to Atlanta's elite social circles. "Only the best for my future power executive," Derek had said when he picked her up looking immaculate in his tailored navy suit. Jasmine had spent hours preparing for tonight, selecting a black designer dress that cost nearly a full paycheck, having her natural hair professionally styled, and applying makeup that enhanced her features while still looking appropriate for such an upscale venue. As they stepped through Sapphire's grand entrance, a uniformed doorman greeted Derek by name. "Good evening, Mr. Foster. We're delighted to have you joining us tonight." Jasmine noticed his eyes flickered over her with subtle surprise before quickly masking it with professional courtesy. "And good evening to you as well, madam." The maitre d' led them through the main dining room, a sophisticated space buzzing with Atlanta's wealthy and connected. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths, illuminating faces of business moguls, local celebrities, and old money families. Jasmine felt eyes tracking her as she walked confidently behind the maitre d' heels, clicking against marble floors. When they reached the private entrance to the Azure Room, a velvet rope was discreetly moved aside. Jasmine immediately noticed she was the only black woman in this exclusive section. The 8 tables were positioned to maximize privacy, while offering stunning views of Atlanta's illuminated skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Your tables, sir, madam," the maitre d' said, pulling out Jasmine's chair with practiced elegance. "Anthony will be your server this evening, and Marcus is the dedicated sommelier for the Azure Room. Should you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." As Anthony approached with menus bound in soft leather, Jasmine caught the momentary flicker of surprise crossing his features before his professional mask slipped back into place. She was familiar with that look, the subtle reassessment that occurred when people realized she wasn't someone's assistant, but a patron. "Derek, this is incredible," Jasmine whispered once the server departed. "How did you manage to get a reservation here?" Derek smiled, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. "One of my clients is friends with the manager. I mentioned your promotion, and he made an exception." He reached across the table to take her hand. "You deserve this, Jas. I know how hard you've worked." Looking around, Jasmine couldn't help but feel slightly out of place, despite her accomplishments and carefully selected attire. At the neighboring table, an older white couple occasionally glanced in their direction with poorly concealed curiosity. At another, a group of executives in animated conversation about market forecasts went silent as she caught their eye, only to resume speaking in slightly hushed tones. Marcus, the sommelier, approached their table with a practiced smile. "Good evening. May I suggest some options to begin your dining experience?" "We'll take a bottle of the Krug Grande Cuvée," Derek said, without consulting the wine list. "Very good choice, sir," Marcus replied, his eyes lingering a moment longer on Jasmine than seemed necessary. As the sommelier departed, Derek leaned forward. "So I have some good news too. Looks like that executive position at Goldman might open up sooner than expected. James mentioned me specifically to the hiring committee. That's fantastic, Jasmine said, genuinely happy for him while silently calculating how a potential move to New York would affect her own career trajectory. I'm having dinner with the senior partners next Thursday. I'd love for you to join us, Derek continued. It would be good for you to start building those connections now. The sommelier returned with their champagne, performing the ritual of presentation and pouring with flourish. After they'd taken their first sips, Derek raised his glass. To us, power couple in the making. Jasmine smiled and clinked her glass against his, trying to ignore the voice in her head, questioning whether she truly belonged in this rarefied air or if she was merely playing a part. The champagne was exquisite notes of citrus and brioche dancing across her palate, momentarily distracting her from her thoughts. Their conversation flowed to their 5-year plan, Derek making partner Jasmine, eventually opening her own marketing firm, a possible summer home in the Hamptons, the right time to start considering children. All carefully plotted steps up the ladder of success they'd both been climbing since graduating from prestigious universities. The moment was interrupted when the heavy glass door to the Azure Room swung open. Conversations paused as heads turned toward the entrance. A black man appearing to be in his mid-40s walked in with confident ease. Unlike every other man in the room, he wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, he was dressed in dark jeans, an untucked button-down shirt, and while his shoes were clearly expensive, they were far more casual than the formal footwear surrounding him. As the maitre d' led him to a corner table with prime views of the skyline, the room filled with quiet murmurs and sideways glances. Jasmine felt a complicated mixture of emotions, watching him take his seat, recognizing the subtle shifts in how the staff interacted with him compared to other guests. Looks like standards are slipping, Derek muttered, taking another sip of champagne. That's the problem with these places once they get popular. Jasmine didn't respond immediately, caught between agreement with the unspoken rules of such establishments and discomfort at how quickly judgment had been passed. Part of her success had come from understanding and adapting to unwritten social codes in predominantly white spaces. She'd learned which rules could be bent and which were inviolable. The casually dressed man seemed completely unbothered by the attention he was receiving. When Marcus approached his table, the man didn't even glance at the wine list before ordering something that made the sommelier's eyebrows rise with apparent surprise and approval. "Did you hear about Larson's new property development in Buckhead?" Derek asked, drawing her attention back to their conversation. "They're breaking ground next month. Pre-sales are already through the roof." As their appetizers arrived, delicate scallops for Jasmine and foie gras for Derek, she noticed increased agitation from a table across the room. An elegant older white woman in diamonds and a silver-haired man in a bespoke suit were engaged in hushed but intense conversation with the floor manager, their eyes repeatedly darting toward the corner where the casually dressed black man sat calmly enjoying his wine. The casually dressed man was now officially the focal point of subtle attention throughout the Azure Room, though he appeared either oblivious to or unbothered by the stares. Jasmine observed him more carefully while pretending to focus on her scallops. He appeared to be around 45, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to occupying any space he chose. Despite his casual attire, his posture and mannerisms suggested cultivation and self-assurance. The sommelier approached his table with a deference that seemed at odds with his earlier interactions with other patrons. The man, Jasmine, overheard the sommelier address him as Mr. Washington ordered without opening the leather-bound wine list. "I'll have the 2010 Domaine Leroy Richebourg Grand Cru," he said, his voice carrying a warm baritone that suggested he was used to being heard. The sommelier's eyebrows rose slightly. "An excellent choice, sir. One of only 6 bottles in our cellar." "I know," Mr. Washington replied, with a slight smile. "And I'd like to start with the sea urchin and caviar, followed by the A5 Wagyu, medium rare." All of this was delivered without so much as a glance at the menu prices, which Jasmine knew ranged from astronomical to shocking even in this exclusive setting. While Derek had insisted on paying tonight, she'd still discreetly researched the menu online beforehand, calculating mental budgets out of habit. At the table nearest to the entrance, the silver-haired couple's conversation grew more animated. The woman's diamond tennis bracelet caught the light as she gestured emphatically toward Mr. Washington's table, her face pinched with disapproval. "That's Eleanor and Richard Blackwell," Derek whispered, following Jasmine's gaze. "He's on the board of First Atlantic Bank. Old Atlanta money." Eleanor Blackwell's voice gradually increased in volume. "It's simply inappropriate. There are standards in establishments like Sapphire, the Azure Room especially." Richard patted her hand in agreement. "The membership fees we pay at the Piedmont Club would never allow for such casualness." Jasmine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, recognizing the familiar coded language that had followed her throughout her education and career. She'd encountered the Blackwell type before, people who believed exclusivity wasn't just about wealth, but about certain unspoken qualifications that often aligned with whiteness and generational privilege. Eleanor Blackwell suddenly rose from her table and approached Derek and Jasmine with a practiced social smile. "I don't believe we've formally met. I'm Eleanor Blackwell. My husband Richard and I are regulars here." Derek immediately straightened his posture. "Derek Foster Meridian Capital. This is my girlfriend, Jasmine Reed." Eleanor's gaze passed over Jasmine with a quick assessment before returning to Derek Foster. "Are you related to the Fosters of Savannah?" "Unfortunately not," Derek replied with a self-deprecating chuckle. "Though I wish I could claim those connections." "Well, you both clearly understand the caliber of establishment Sapphire represents." Eleanor continued, her voice lowered conspiratorially. "Which is why I find it so distressing that management would allow just anyone in without adhering to proper standards." She tilted her head subtly toward Mr. Washington's table. Jasmine felt her stomach tighten, trapped in the familiar no-win scenario of these situations. Speaking up risked being labeled aggressive or oversensitive, potentially damaging Derek's networking opportunity. Staying silent made her complicit. "The Azure Room used to be so exclusive," Eleanor continued. "Richard and I have been members since they opened. We've entertained senators here." Derek nodded sympathetically. "It's unfortunate when establishments let their standards slip." "Precisely," Eleanor beamed at him as if he'd passed an unspoken test. "I do hope you'll both join us for a drink later. We're having a small gathering next weekend at our Lake Lanier home, discussing some exciting property development opportunities. The neighborhood is very quality-focused." Her eyes flickered briefly to Jasmine with a tight smile. "Carefully maintained property values, you understand." The subtext was clear to Jasmine. She'd heard these euphemisms throughout her life. Good neighborhoods, quality schools, maintained property values, all code for racial and socioeconomic exclusion. "That sounds wonderful," Derek replied, clearly registering the networking opportunity. "We'd be delighted." Eleanor seemed pleased. "Excellent. I should return to Richard, but do join us after your meal." She leaned closer. "And don't worry, I've already spoken to the floor manager about our uninvited guest. Some people simply don't understand certain spaces aren't meant for everyone." As Eleanor glided back to her table, Jasmine took a large sip of champagne, needing something to do besides express the frustration building within her. "Incredible connection," Derek whispered excitedly. "The Blackwells control half the real estate deals in Buckhead. This could be huge for us." Jasmine noted his use of us with mixed emotions. Derek often spoke of their success as a unit, which was both affirming and occasionally suffocating. She glanced toward Mr. Washington again, who was now enjoying his appetizer with apparent appreciation, seemingly unaware of the social machinations spinning around him. Eleanor Blackwell was now engaged in animated conversation with Timothy Barnes, Sapphire's floor manager. A slender man in his 50s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a perpetual expression of polite concern. Barnes nodded repeatedly as Eleanor spoke, occasionally glancing toward the corner table with visible discomfort. "I'm simply saying the Azure Room has standards." Timothy Eleanor's voice carried despite her attempt at discretion. Proper attire is the bare minimum. Richard and I pay annual membership fees for this exclusivity." Richard Blackwell added, with practiced authority, "It reflects poorly on the establishment. Our guests expect a certain atmosphere." Several neighboring tables nodded in agreement, forming an impromptu coalition against the perceived intrusion. Jasmine noticed Derek watching the interaction with interest before he suddenly straightened his tie and stood up. "I'm going to back them up," he said quietly. "The Blackwells will appreciate the support." Before Jasmine could object, Derek had joined the small crowd now surrounding the increasingly uncomfortable floor manager. "I completely understand your concerns," Barnes was saying, his voice professionally modulated. "At Sapphire, we value all our patrons." "Which is precisely the problem," Derek interjected smoothly. "Some establishments should prioritize their loyal patrons who respect the ambiance everyone else works hard to maintain." Eleanor Blackwell beamed at him approvingly. Other diners murmured agreement, the collective entitlement in the room growing palpable. Jasmine remained seated, a war of emotions raging within her. Part of her success had come from knowing when to blend in, when to pick her battles. Yet watching this scene unfold, the casual ease with which this group decided who belonged and who didn't made her stomach churn. She thought of her parents, both educators who had raised her to be proud but pragmatic, to work twice as hard while understanding some doors would remain closed regardless of merit. The floor manager now looked trapped between the demands of his wealthy regulars and some unspoken concern. His eyes darted between the indignant group and Mr. Washington's table. "I'll speak with him," Barnes finally conceded, straightening his already impeccable tie. "Perhaps suggest the main dining room might be more suitable." Jasmine watched as Barnes approached Mr. Washington's table with a caution of someone advancing toward an unpredictable situation. The entire Azure room fell into hushed anticipation, barely concealed behind sips of wine and pretend conversations. Timothy Barnes approached Mr. Washington's table with the practiced smile of someone who had navigated countless delicate situations in his career. The floor manager's posture was stiff, his hands clasped behind his back as he positioned himself at a respectful distance from the table. "Good evening, sir." Barnes began, his voice pitched low but still audible throughout the hushed Azure room. "I trust you're enjoying your meal so far." Mr. Washington looked up from his sea urchin appetizer, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a napkin. "Very much so. The uni is exceptional tonight." Barnes nodded, his smile tightening. "Wonderful to hear. Sir, I hope you don't mind my mentioning, but the Azure room does typically observe a certain expectation regarding attire." Mr. Washington set down his fork with deliberate care. "Is that so?" "Yes, sir. While we certainly appreciate your patronage," Barnes continued, his voice growing more strained, "some of our regular guests have expressed concern about maintaining the particular atmosphere of this section." "Which guests might those be?" Mr. Washington asked, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp and observant. Barnes swallowed, visibly unwilling to directly implicate the Blackwells and their newfound supporters. "That's not important, sir. I'm simply wondering if perhaps you might be more comfortable in our main dining room. The menu is identical, and I could arrange for your items to be transferred immediately. No inconvenience at all." By now, all pretense of other conversations had ceased. Every diner in the Azure room was openly watching the exchange. Buy, manner, buy. Jasmine felt a knot forming in her stomach as she observed the familiar scene unfolding. A black person being told, however politely, that they didn't belong in a space reserved for others. Mr. Washington leaned back slightly in his chair, studying Barnes with a calm intensity that made the manager shift his weight nervously. "More comfortable," Mr. Washington repeated the phrase with careful consideration. "I find it interesting you're concerned about my comfort rather than the comfort of your regular guests." He gestured to his half-finished appetizer. "I'm quite comfortable where I am." Barnes cleared his throat. "Sir, please understand, The Azure Room maintains certain standards. Is there a published dress code I've violated? Mr. Washington interrupted, his voice remaining level but carrying a new edge of authority. The question hung in the air. Barnes opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly searching for the appropriate response. Well, not explicitly published, but there is an understanding among our regular patrons. An understanding, Mr. Washington echoed, nodding slowly. Interesting choice of words. From her table, Jasmine could see Derek and the Blackwells watching, with expressions ranging from indignation to satisfaction at seeing the unwelcome intruder put in his place. She remained frozen in her seat, part of her wanting to speak up, another part, the part that had carefully navigated corporate America for years, calculating the professional risk of aligning herself with the wrong side of this confrontation. Eleanor Blackwell's voice cut through the tension. Timothy, surely you can explain that some standards need not be written to be understood. It's a matter of respect for the establishment. Several patrons murmured in agreement. Derek nodded emphatically. Mr. Washington turned his gaze directly to Eleanor Blackwell. Respect for the establishment, he repeated thoughtfully. I couldn't agree more, ma'am. Barnes looked increasingly uncomfortable, trapped between the wealthy regulars and something about Mr. Washington that clearly made him hesitant to push further. Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience. Barnes tried again, but I must insist. You must insist, Mr. Washington raised an eyebrow. That's a strong position to take. On what grounds exactly? The confrontation had escalated beyond Barnes' ability to manage, with his usual diplomatic finesse. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the room's perfectly regulated temperature. Sir, please don't make this more difficult, Barnes began, but was interrupted by a commotion from the kitchen entrance. A man in a white chef's jacket emerged through the swinging doors, moving with urgent purpose toward Mr. Washington's table. He was in his late 30s with a closely trimmed beard and the intense focus of someone accustomed to high-pressure environments. Mr. Barnes, the chef, called out, alarm evident in his voice. A word, please. Barnes turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Chef Santiago, I'm handling a situation at the moment. That's precisely why we need to speak. Chef Santiago insisted, positioning himself between Barnes and Mr. Washington's table. He lowered his voice, but in the silence of the room, his urgent whisper carried. Do you know who this is? Barnes glanced at Mr. Washington with growing uncertainty. A patron who needs to understand our standards. That's Andre Washington. Chef Santiago hissed, his eyes wide with disbelief at Barnes' ignorance. The owner? The words dropped like a stone in still water, ripples of shock spreading across the Azure Room. Barnes's face drained of color so dramatically that Jasmine momentarily worried he might faint. The owner, Barnes repeated weakly, turning back toward Mr. Washington with dawning horror. Andre Washington remained seated, his expression inscrutable as he took an unhurried sip of his wine, watching the realization cascade through the room like a slow-motion avalanche. The owner, Barnes, repeated, his voice barely audible as the blood drained from his face. But Mr. Washington is in Barcelona this week for the restaurant conference. Chef Santiago shook his head urgently. He returned early. That's Andre Washington. The Azure Room fell into complete silence as the implications settled over every table. Eleanor Blackwell's champagne glass remained suspended halfway to her lips, her expression frozen in horrified realization. Richard Blackwell suddenly became intensely interested in adjusting his tie. Derek, who had been standing confidently beside the Blackwells moments earlier, took an unconscious step backward. Andre Washington carefully set down his wine glass and regarded Barnes with calm intensity. I returned this morning. Thought I'd experience my restaurant as a guest tonight. His voice carried effortlessly through the silent room. It's been educational. Barnes looked as though he might disintegrate on the spot. Mr. Washington, I cannot begin to express my profound apologies for this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, Andre repeated thoughtfully. Is that what we're calling it? Jasmine watched the scene unfold with a complicated mixture of emotions: vindication, embarrassment for her silence, and a strange sense of awe at the perfect reversal playing out before her. The tables around her were filled with people, suddenly fascinated by their plates, avoiding eye contact with each other, or especially with Andre Washington. Chef Santiago stepped forward. "Mr. Washington, we had no idea you'd be joining us tonight. We would have prepared." Andre raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "That was rather the point, Miguel. I wanted the authentic experience." His gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on the Blackwells and Derek before settling back on Barnes. And authentic it certainly was. Barnes was visibly trembling now. "Sir, please understand those guests expressed concerns, and I was merely trying to accommodate them," Washington finished for him. "Yes, I observed exactly which guests you prioritized and how quickly." His tone remained measured, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath his words. "Tell me, Timothy, how long have you been managing this floor?" 7 years, Sir Barnes replied, his voice barely above a whisper. 7 years, Washington nodded. "And in those 7 years, did you ever think to question why there's no written dress code for the Azure Room? Did you wonder why the reservation policy states we welcome all patrons who respect our establishment and fellow diners?" Barnes had no answer, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Andre turned to Chef Santiago. "Miguel, please ask Marcus to bring up the 96 Romane Conti from my private collection." The mention of the legendary wine bottles, of which could command tens of thousands of dollars, caused a ripple of murmurs throughout the room. The statement was a power move, a reminder of exactly who controlled this space. Right away, Mr. Washington Chef Santiago replied, shooting a final pitying glance at Barnes before hurrying back toward the kitchen. Andre returned his attention to Barnes. "I think we're finished here, Timothy. We'll discuss your approach to guest relations tomorrow morning in my office." Dismissed Barnes retreated with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much at all. As he passed the Blackwells' table, Eleanor attempted to catch his eye, perhaps seeking some diplomatic extraction from the situation, but Barnes kept his gaze firmly on the floor. The silence in the Azure Room was deafening. Conversations had ceased, entirely replaced by the soft clink of silverware, as people pretended to focus on their meals while straining to observe the unfolding drama. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged solely based on their appearance, only for it to backfire spectacularly? Leave a comment with the number 1 if you've seen prejudice exposed like this, or number 2 if you've experienced it personally. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served. What do you think happens next? Will Andre confront the Blackwells directly, or does he have something more powerful in mind? Let's continue with this incredible turn of events. Andre Washington turned his attention back to his meal with remarkable composure, sampling his sea urchin as if the confrontation minutes earlier had never occurred. The Azure Room remained suspended in uncomfortable silence, the air thick with unspoken tension and embarrassment. Marcus the sommelier soon appeared carrying a bottle with trembling hands. Even from her table, Jasmine could see the reverence with which he handled the legendary Romane Conti, a wine so rare and expensive it was treated more like a historical artifact than a beverage. The 1996 Romane Conti Mr. Washington Marcus announced his earlier cool professionalism, replaced with obvious deference. "From your private collection, as requested." Andre nodded. "Thank you, Marcus." He observed the sommelier's careful uncorking ritual before adding, "Please bring an additional glass." Marcus looked momentarily puzzled. "Sir." Andre's gaze traveled across the room until it landed directly on Jasmine. Their eyes met, and Jasmine felt a jolt of surprise as he gave her a slight knowing smile. "I'd like to invite that young lady to join me," he said, gesturing toward Jasmine. "If she's interested." Every head in the Azure Room turned toward Jasmine, who felt her face grow warm under the sudden scrutiny. Derek, who had slunk back to their table following the revelation, stared at her with widened eyes. "What's happening?" he whispered urgently. "Do you know him?" Jasmine shook her head slightly, just as surprised as everyone else. "No, we've never met." Marcus approached their table with the awkward formality of someone delivering life-changing news. "Madam, Mr. Washington would be honored if you would join him at his table." He lowered his voice. "It's an exceptional privilege. That wine? We have clients who've been on a waiting list for years just to taste it." Jasmine found herself at a critical decision point. Joining Andre Washington meant publicly aligning herself with him, a powerful statement in the wake of the confrontation. Staying with Derek meant prioritizing her relationship and the social connections he valued. The symbolism of crossing the room was lost on no one, least of all Jasmine herself. Derek gripped her wrist under the table. "Jasmine, think about what you're doing," he muttered through a forced smile. "We're here as a couple. The Blackwells are watching." His concern for appearances rather than her feelings crystallized something for Jasmine. With deliberate care, she removed his hand from her wrist and stood up, smoothing her dress. "I believe I will join Mr. Washington," she said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "Thank you for the invitation." Marcus looked visibly relieved. "Very good, madam. This way, please." As Jasmine followed the sommelier across the Azure Room, she felt the weight of every stare. Eleanor Blackwell's face was a mask of barely contained outrage. Richard Blackwell studied his watch with sudden fascination. Other diners tracked her progress with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation, already reassessing their initial judgments of her. Andre stood as she approached, offering his hand. "Andre Washington, thank you for joining me." His handshake was firm and warm, his eyes direct and appraising in a way that made Jasmine feel truly seen rather than merely observed. "Jasmine Reed," she replied, finding her voice stronger than expected. "Thank you for the invitation." Once she was seated, Marcus poured a small amount of the ruby-colored wine into her glass. Jasmine, who knew enough about wine etiquette to recognize the significance of this particular bottle, took a careful sip. The complexity of flavors was unlike anything she'd experienced before, layers of dark fruit, earth, and spice unfolding across her palate. "Incredible," she said honestly. Andre smiled. "Worth experiencing at least once." He raised his glass slightly. "To unexpected meetings." They clinked glasses, and Jasmine couldn't help but notice Derek watching them with thinly veiled anger. He had pulled out his phone and was typing furiously, likely texting her demands for explanation. "I should probably explain why I invited you to join me," Andre said once Marcus had departed. "I was wondering," Jasmine admitted. "I noticed something interesting earlier," he replied. "When everyone else was joining the campaign to have me removed, you stayed seated. You didn't participate." Jasmine felt a flash of shame. "I didn't speak up either." Andre nodded, acknowledging this. "Speaking up comes with risks, especially for people like us in spaces like this." He gestured subtly around the room. "I've found success, Miss Reed, but that doesn't mean I haven't experienced exactly what happened tonight 100 times before." "I can imagine," Jasmine said, though she immediately regretted the presumption. "Can you?" Andre asked, not unkindly. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Reed." Over the next course, a perfectly seared scallop dish that Chef Santiago insisted on preparing personally for their table, Jasmine shared her background. She told him about growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Charlotte, her parents, both educators who emphasized excellence and resilience. She described her marketing career, the careful navigation of predominantly white corporate spaces, and her recent promotion. Andre listened intently, asking insightful questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite conversation. In turn, he shared parts of his own journey. "I started with a food truck," he revealed, surprising Jasmine. "Southern cuisine with global influences. Saved every penny while working 3 jobs until I could afford it." From food truck to sapphire, Jasmine marveled. "That's incredible." Andre's expression turned reflective. "The food was never the hardest part. It was getting people to take me seriously as a business owner rather than just the help." He took another sip of wine. I now own 6 restaurants across the Southeast, a culinary consulting firm, and a small import business specializing in rare ingredients. As they continued talking, Jasmine noticed Eleanor Blackwell rising from her table and approaching them with the determined stride of someone accustomed to controlling uncomfortable situations. Mr. Washington, Eleanor began with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I simply must apologize for the unfortunate misunderstanding earlier. Had we known who you were... That's precisely the problem, isn't it, Mrs. Blackwell? Andre interrupted smoothly. Your behavior changes depending on who you think someone is, rather than treating everyone with basic dignity. Eleanor flushed, but pressed on. I assure you, we have nothing but respect for you and your establishment. Richard sits on several boards that could be quite beneficial to your business interests. Perhaps we could discuss potential opportunities over drinks. Andre regarded her with calm detachment. I make it a policy not to mix business with people who would have me removed from my own establishment for wearing jeans, Mrs. Blackwell. The rejection was delivered so politely that it took Eleanor a moment to process it. When she did, her face hardened. Well, I see. Richard and I have been loyal patrons since Sapphire opened, Mr. Washington. I would hope you value customer loyalty. I value customers who treat all my patrons with respect, Andre replied. Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Reed and I were having a lovely conversation. Dismissed for the second time that evening, Eleanor retreated to her table, where Richard was already signaling for their check, his earlier interest in dessert evidently forgotten. Jasmine couldn't help but feel a flutter of satisfaction watching the Blackwells' hasty preparation to leave, though she kept her expression neutral. You handled that gracefully. Years of practice, Andre replied with a slight smile. Though I admit there's a certain satisfaction in these moments. Their conversation was interrupted by Derek, who had finally worked up the courage to approach their table. His face was flushed, his earlier confidence replaced by an awkward attempt at ingratiation. Mr. Washington, I just wanted to introduce myself properly. Derek Foster, Meridian Capital. He extended his hand. I specialize in diverse investment opportunities, particularly in urban development zones. Andre looked at the offered hand, but didn't take it. Mr. Foster, you were quite vocal earlier about maintaining the ambiance of this section, as I recall. Derek's hand slowly lowered. A regrettable misunderstanding. I have tremendous respect for what you've built here. Now that you know who I am, Andre noted. Derek shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine, don't you think it's time we finished our celebration dinner together? His emphasis on the last word carried an unmistakable warning. Before Jasmine could respond, Andre reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a business card which he handed to her. My restaurant group is expanding our marketing department. We're looking for someone with corporate experience who understands authentic community engagement. If you're interested, call that number directly. Jasmine accepted the card, feeling its heavy stock between her fingers like a tangible opportunity. Derek's expression darkened as he watched the exchange. Jasmine, we're leaving, he said, dropping all pretense of politeness. Now, the command hung in the air between them. Jasmine looked from Derek to Andre, then down at the business card in her hand. In that moment, she saw her choices with perfect clarity continue accommodating Derek's social climbing aspirations and casual racism, or stand firmly in her own integrity. No, Derek, she said quietly but firmly. I'm not leaving. Not with you, anyway. Derek's face contorted with disbelief. Are you serious? After everything I've done for you, the connections I've made for us? For yourself, Jasmine corrected him. And yes, I'm completely serious. You're making a huge mistake, Derek hissed, leaning closer. I know the senior partners at Reynolds & Klein. One call from me. Is that a threat? Mr. Foster, Andre interrupted his voice, carrying just enough to attract attention from nearby tables. Are you threatening Miss Reed's professional standing because she declined to leave with you? Derek straightened, suddenly aware of the audience. This is between Jasmine and me. Actually, Jasmine said, finding strength in Andre's support, I think we're finished. Please leave my things at my apartment door tomorrow. We can arrange the rest through text. For a moment, Derek looked as though he might continue arguing, but the steady gaze of Andre Washington and the watchful eyes of the remaining Azure Room patrons dissuaded him. With a final glare at Jasmine, he stalked toward the exit, pausing only to throw cash on their original table for the bill. "I hope I didn't overstep," Andre said once Derek had gone. "But I've seen too many talented people compromised by association with the wrong partners." Jasmine took a deep breath, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the span of an hour, she had ended a 2-year relationship and potentially altered her career trajectory. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the intervention and the job offer. Though I should warn you, I haven't actually accepted yet." Andre laughed, a warm sound that seemed to break the last of the tension in the air. "Fair enough. Consider it an open invitation." As the evening progressed, the remaining diners in the Azure Room cast frequent glances their way, many now attempting to catch Andre's eye or gain his attention, the very same people who had supported his removal earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. As the evening continued, the Azure Room gradually transformed. Staff members, now aware of their owner's presence, moved with a mixture of heightened professionalism and visible anxiety. The remaining patrons, having witnessed the Blackwell's humiliation and Derek's dismissal, maintained a respectful distance while obviously straining to overhear the conversation at Andre's table. "You'll have to forgive the staff," Andre said, noticing Jasmine's observation of their nervous energy. "I don't often drop in unannounced." "Is this a regular practice?" Jasmine asked. "Experiencing your restaurant's incognito?" Andre nodded. "Periodically. It's the only way to truly understand what my customers experience." His expression turned reflective, though tonight was particularly illuminating. "I can imagine," Jasmine said, then corrected herself. "Actually, I shouldn't presume. I haven't walked in your shoes." True, Andre acknowledged, but there are parallels in our experiences, I suspect. He studied her for a moment before continuing. "The Azure Room isn't the first exclusive space where I've been made to feel unwelcome, despite having every right to be there." He shared a story about purchasing his first luxury car, a moment that should have been a celebration of his success. "I walked into that dealership after my first restaurant received a Michelin star, wore a custom suit, had financing prearranged. The salespeople still directed all their questions to my white business associate, assuming he was the decision maker." Jasmine nodded in recognition. "At my firm, clients still occasionally mistake me for an assistant during initial meetings. 5 years, and it hasn't stopped." "It doesn't," Andre said with a gentle directness. "The tax never ends." "The tax. The black tax," he clarified. "The extra effort, the additional credentials, the perfect appearance, the impeccable language, the constant self-monitoring. The exhausting work of making white people comfortable with your presence in spaces they consider theirs." His words resonated with Jasmine's experiences so precisely that she felt a tightness in her chest, the relief of having someone articulate what she had felt but rarely discussed. "My mother called it wearing the mask," Jasmine offered. "She taught me to code switch before I knew what it was called. Said it was the armor I'd need." Andre nodded in understanding. "My father had similar advice. He worked 40 years at the post office, never missed a day. Told me success required being twice as good to get half as far." "My parents said the same thing," Jasmine replied, surprised at how easily this conversation flowed compared to the carefully edited versions of herself she typically presented in professional settings. "The irony is," Andre continued, "wealth doesn't exempt you from it. I own this building outright. Yet 2 months ago, security followed me through my own hotel lobby when I came in through the side entrance after a morning run." As they exchanged stories, Jasmine felt layers of professional guardedness falling away. She found herself sharing experiences she typically kept private. The microaggressions at her firm, the exhaustion of being the diversity success story, the careful calculations before speaking in meetings dominated by white male voices. "The most insidious part," she admitted, "is how it makes you doubt yourself." "Tonight, when the confrontation started, part of me wondered if maybe you were violating some unwritten rule I didn't know about." If maybe they were right. Andre nodded solemnly. They count on that doubt, on our willingness to question ourselves first rather than their assumptions. He gestured subtly toward the remaining patrons. Look around. Notice anything? Jasmine surveyed the Azure Room. Everyone's watching us, while pretending not to. Besides that, Andre smiled. Notice the staff. Jasmine observed more carefully and realized what he meant. While the patrons of the Azure Room were predominantly white, the staff reflected Atlanta's diversity: Black, Latino, Asian, and white employees working in various roles. My hiring practices aren't accidental, Andre explained. Neither is my leadership team. My executive chef is Chilean-American. My beverage director is Korean-American. My operations manager is a Black woman who started as a server. He paused as Chef Santiago approached their table, presenting 2 impeccably plated desserts that weren't on the regular menu. Mr. Washington, I took the liberty of preparing a special dessert course. Passion fruit soufflé with guava sorbet and coconut crumble. It looks wonderful, Miguel Andre replied warmly. Thank you. After the chef departed, Andre continued his point. When I opened Sapphire, food critics questioned whether Atlanta was ready for fine dining that incorporated Caribbean and African influences. They called it ambitious and unexpected, their polite way of questioning whether a Black chef could succeed at this level. But you proved them wrong, Jasmine said. I did more than that, Andre replied with quiet confidence. I changed their metrics of success. Now they evaluate other establishments against my standards. As they enjoyed the dessert, which was indeed exceptional, Jasmine noticed 3 additional staff members had emerged from the kitchen and back office areas. Andre waved them over, introducing them as key members of his team. Natalie Johnson, Operations Director, David Kim, Beverage Director, and Zoe Hernandez, Director of Guest Relations. Miss Reed is considering joining our marketing department, Andre informed them, causing Jasmine to raise her eyebrows in surprise at how he'd framed her potential interest as a near certainty. We've been looking to expand our market reach, Natalie said enthusiastically, especially with the new location opening in Charlotte next spring. Charlotte, Jasmine perked up. That's my hometown, Andre smiled. Another point in your favor. As the team members pulled up chairs to join their conversation, the dynamic in the Azure Room shifted once again. The exclusive VIP section had transformed into something more communal and vibrant than Jasmine suspected it had ever been, with genuine laughter and animated discussion replacing the earlier stilted performances of wealth and status. Several remaining patrons observing this transformation and the easy rapport Andre had with his team began to approach their table. A middle-aged white couple introduced themselves as longtime customers, complimenting Andre on the restaurant before awkwardly adding that they had always respected the diversity of the staff. Andre accepted their comments with gracious professionalism, though Jasmine noted the slight tension in his smile, the same expression she'd perfected when receiving well-intentioned but uncomfortable comments from white colleagues. As the evening progressed, more patrons approached, each seeming eager to establish themselves as one of the good ones in the wake of the earlier confrontation. Andre handled each interaction with diplomatic skill, neither absolving nor condemning them outright. Jasmine watched these social maneuvers with newfound clarity. Before tonight, she might have accepted such overtures at face value, grateful for any acknowledgement in exclusive spaces. Now observing Andre's measured responses, she recognized the performance for what it was, the hasty recalibration of people who had revealed their true perspectives earlier. It's exhausting, isn't it? She asked quietly during a moment when they were briefly alone. Andre glanced at her understanding immediately. Profoundly. But necessary if you want to change things from the inside. Is it worth it? The question escaped before she could filter it. Andre considered this seriously. There are days I wonder. Then I look at my team, people building careers they couldn't access elsewhere. I think about the young chefs and restaurateurs who tell me seeing my success made them believe it was possible. He smiled. On balance, yes. As their conversation continued, Jasmine found herself sharing her own ambitions, not the carefully crafted goals she'd discussed with Derek, but her deeper aspirations. She told Andre about wanting to create marketing campaigns that authentically represented communities of color without resorting to stereotypes or tokenism, about her frustration with being the lone voice in strategy meetings, questioning tone-deaf messaging. "That's exactly the perspective we need," Andre said. "Someone who understands both worlds but hasn't lost sight of what matters." By the time Andre's driver arrived to take Jasmine home, Derek having departed with their shared ride, she felt as though she'd experienced more authentic connection in one evening than in months of networking events and corporate functions. As they said their goodbyes outside, Sapphire Andre handed her a business card different from the one he'd given her earlier. "My personal number," he explained. "Call me Monday if you're interested in discussing the position further. No pressure, but I think you'd be an excellent addition to our team." Jasmine accepted the card, a sense of possibility expanding within her. "Thank you for everything tonight." Andre smiled. "Sometimes the universe has interesting ways of bringing the right people together, even if the circumstances are less than ideal." As his driver held the door for her, Jasmine looked back at Sapphire's illuminated facade with new eyes. The restaurant that had begun the evening as yet another exclusive space to navigate had transformed into something unexpected, perhaps the beginning of a new chapter. Monday morning arrived with the persistent buzz of Jasmine's alarm at 6:30. She reached for her phone with the automatic motion of someone who had built a life around corporate routines and expectations. 3 missed calls from Derek glowed on her screen, along with a series of increasingly urgent text messages. "We need to talk about last night. You're making a huge mistake. Call me before you do anything you'll regret. The Blackwells are furious. This could affect your career." She set the phone down without responding and stared at her ceiling, replaying Saturday night's events. The confrontation in the Azure room had crystallized something she'd been feeling for months, perhaps years. The careful compartmentalization of her identity, the strategic silences, the energy expended navigating spaces that weren't designed to welcome her, all of it suddenly felt unsustainable. Jasmine showered and dressed with deliberate care, selecting a bold red blazer over a simple black dress, rather than the muted grays and blues that dominated her work wardrobe. The choice felt symbolic, though she wasn't entirely sure of what. Her morning commute to Reynolds & Klein Marketing proceeded as usual, the same crowded train, the same overpriced coffee from the lobby vendor, the same security guard who always checked her ID more carefully than her white colleagues. Yet everything felt different, as though she was observing these familiar patterns through a new lens. When she arrived at her desk, a calendar notification reminded her of the morning's executive team meeting where she would officially be announced as the new associate director. An achievement that had consumed her focus for months now felt strangely hollow. There she is, Marcus Chen, the firm's creative director, stopped by her desk with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Ready for the big announcement. Corner office with a view awaits." Jasmine smiled, appreciating his support. Marcus had been one of her few allies during her rise through the company ranks. "Thanks. It still doesn't feel quite real." "Well, it should," he replied. "You earned it. 3 years of 60-hour weeks while producing the best campaigns in the department. They'd be idiots not to promote you." As they walked toward the conference room, Marcus lowered his voice. "Fair warning though, Richardson is on a tear about urban market initiatives again. Keeps using phrases like street credibility and authentic voice." Jasmine suppressed a sigh. James Richardson, the firm's CEO, had a particular talent for making awkward comments that put the burden on her to either correct him or maintain uncomfortable silence. It was exactly the kind of exhausting interaction Andre had described as the tax. The executive meeting proceeded as expected. Congratulations on her promotion, discussion of upcoming campaigns, budget projections for the quarter. Then, as Marcus had predicted, Richardson's pivot to their newest client acquisition. "Jasmine, this is right in your wheelhouse," Richardson said, his voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone trying too hard to appear progressive. Urban Provisions is looking to expand their market share in African American communities. We need something with real authenticity. The way he emphasized authenticity made it clear what he meant. They expected her to translate their marketing message into something urban enough to appeal to Black consumers while remaining palatable to white executives. What specific demographics are they targeting? Jasmine asked, maintaining her professional tone. African American communities span all socioeconomic levels and cultural preferences. Richardson looked momentarily confused, as if he hadn't considered this obvious fact. Well, you know, urban, young professionals with diverse backgrounds. The coded language hung awkwardly in the air. Jasmine noticed several executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded as if Richardson was making perfect sense. "I'll need more specific parameters," Jasmine replied, making notes on her tablet. "Household income, ranges, education levels, regional considerations. Urban and diverse aren't actionable marketing categories." Richardson's smile tightened. Of course. Just thought you'd have some inherent insights." He moved quickly to the next agenda item, clearly eager to escape the moment he'd created. As the meeting concluded, Jasmine remained seated, allowing others to file out ahead of her. The interaction with Richardson replayed in her mind, connecting to dozens of similar moments throughout her career. Each individually dismissible as a minor irritation, but collectively forming a pattern that drained her energy and compromised her work. Her phone vibrated with a text notification. "Unknown number. This is Andre Washington. Just checking if you're still considering our conversation from Saturday night. No pressure, but my team is excited about the possibility." The message arrived like perfect timing from the universe. Jasmine stared at her phone, feeling the weight of the decision before her. Stay in her hard-won position at a prestigious firm where she would always be the diverse voice expected to represent all Black perspectives, or take a chance on Andre's offer to join a team where her identity might be valued, rather than tokenized. She was still contemplating this when her desk phone rang. Jasmine Reed, she answered automatically. "Miss Reed, James Richardson. Could you come to my office? There's a situation we need to discuss." The CEO's tone carried an unmistakable tension. "Of course. I'll be right there." When Jasmine entered Richardson's corner office, she immediately noticed Derek seated in one of the leather chairs across from the CEO's desk. His presence hit her like a physical shock. Derek acknowledged her with a tight smile. "I was just explaining to James about our unfortunate experience at Sapphire on Saturday." Richardson gestured for her to sit. "Derek has been sharing some concerning information about an interaction with the Blackwells. As you know, Richard Blackwell sits on several boards with our major clients. The trap was obvious now. Derek had leveraged his connection to Richardson to frame Saturday's events in a way that protected himself and implicated her. The petty vengeance was so predictable that Jasmine almost wanted to laugh. "What specific concerns do you have, Mr. Richardson?" she asked, deliberately using his formal title to establish professional distance. "Derek tells me you behaved unprofessionally toward the Blackwells, created a scene that embarrassed the firm by association." Richardson's expression was grave, as if he were discussing a major ethical breach rather than a personal dinner. "That's not an accurate representation of events," Jasmine replied calmly. "He says you publicly sided against them in some sort of racial confrontation." With the restaurant owner, Richardson continued, clearly uncomfortable with even discussing the topic. "I accepted a dinner invitation from Andre Washington, who happens to be the owner of Sapphire after he was subjected to discriminatory treatment," Jasmine corrected. "I made no scene. I simply changed tables." Derek leaned forward. "The Blackwells are extremely influential, Jasmine. They've expressed concerns about working with Reynolds and Klein given your behavior." The implied threat was clear. Her promotion, perhaps even her position at the firm, was being leveraged against her relationship with the Blackwell's people, who had attempted to have a black man removed from his own establishment based solely on his appearance. Richardson cleared his throat. This puts us in a difficult position, Jasmine. The Blackwells represent connections to clients worth millions in annual billing. I understand, Jasmine said, her voice steady, despite the anger building within her. What exactly are you asking of me? A simple apology would smooth things over, Derek suggested with practiced reasonableness. The Blackwells are hosting a charity event this weekend. Your presence, along with an acknowledgement of the misunderstanding, would resolve the situation. Richardson nodded encouragingly. It seems a small concession to protect relationships vital to the firm. And to your future here, of course. The moment crystallized with perfect clarity. They were asking her to apologize to people who had demonstrated blatant prejudice, to validate their behavior in exchange for professional advancement. The true cost of her corner office suddenly became transparent. Jasmine thought of Andre Washington's calm dignity in the face of discrimination, of his deliberate choices to create opportunities for others rather than simply securing his own comfort, of his question about whether the exhausting work of changing systems from within was worth it. In that moment, she knew her answer, both to Richardson's implied demand and to Andre's job offer. I appreciate your concern for the firm's relationships, Jasmine said carefully. But I won't be apologizing to the Blackwells. Richardson's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Jasmine, perhaps you don't understand the seriousness. I understand perfectly, she interrupted with calm confidence. And I've made my decision. She reached into her bag and retrieved the business card Andre had given her, placing it deliberately on Richardson's desk. This is Andre Washington's contact information. Before you make any decisions based on Derek's version of events, I suggest you speak with Mr. Washington directly. His restaurant group represents over $50 million in annual revenue, with expansion plans that will require significant marketing support. Derek's expression shifted from smug certainty to alarm. James, she's obviously trying to. Additionally, Jasmine continued, I should inform you both that I'm considering an offer to lead marketing for Washington Restaurant Group. The statement was more definitive than her actual decision had been moments earlier, but saying it aloud cemented her resolve. An offer, Richardson repeated, his tone shifting as he processed this new information and its implications. Washington approached you professionally. He did, Jasmine confirmed. After witnessing my handling of a difficult situation created by others, she glanced meaningfully at Derek. Richardson's business instincts visibly overcame his initial reaction calculations running behind his eyes.
I see. Well, that puts things in a different light.
Derek stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. The Blackwells. Thank you for your input, Mr. Foster Richardson. Cut him off with the dismissive tone he reserved for people who had suddenly become irrelevant to his interests. But I believe this is now a matter between Miss Reed and Reynolds and Klein. Dismissed, Derek had no choice but to exit, though not before shooting Jasmine a look of pure venom. The door closed behind him, with more force than necessary. Alone with Richardson, Jasmine felt an unexpected calm. The worst had happened, her professional standing had been threatened because of her integrity, yet she felt more certain than uncertain. I'd like to request the rest of the day off, she said simply. I have some decisions to make. Richardson studied her with new consideration. Of course. Take whatever time you need. He paused, then added, And Jasmine, perhaps we should discuss your role here more thoroughly before you make any final decisions. I'm sure we can find a way to better utilize your unique perspectives. The irony wasn't lost on her. Only when faced with losing her to a competitor did Richardson suddenly value what she brought to the firm beyond her utility as their diversity showcase. I'll consider it, Jasmine replied diplomatically, though in her heart she had already made her choice. Leaving Richardson's office, she pulled out her phone and typed a response to Andre's text. "I'm very interested in discussing the position further. Are you available for lunch today?" His reply came almost immediately. "Absolutely. La Petite Maison at 1 p.m. They know to expect us." Jasmine smiled to herself as she gathered her personal items from her desk. The path ahead might not be without challenges, but for the first time in years, it felt authentically her own. The hostess at La Petite Maison greeted Jasmine with warm professionalism. "Miss Reed, Mr. Washington is waiting for you on the terrace." The restaurant, an elegant French bistro in Midtown, offered a perfect balance of sophistication and comfort. As Jasmine was led through the main dining room, she noticed the diverse clientele and staff, a stark contrast to the homogeneous atmosphere of the Azure Room. Andre stood as she approached the table, dressed in a well-tailored charcoal suit that made Saturday night's casual attire seem like a deliberate choice rather than a fashion statement. "Jasmine, thank you for coming," he said, greeting her with a genuine smile. "I took the liberty of ordering a selection of appetizers, but please choose whatever you'd like for your main course." Once they were seated and had exchanged pleasantries, Andre addressed the matter at hand. "So your message suggested you might be interested in our offer after all." "Let's just say the universe provided some additional clarity this morning," Jasmine replied briefly, explaining the confrontation with Richardson and Derek without dwelling on the details. Andre nodded with understanding. Corporate politics can make even the most straightforward decisions complicated. "It wasn't complicated in the end," Jasmine said with conviction. "Just clarifying." Their conversation shifted to more concrete discussions about the position Andre was offering, marketing director for the Washington Restaurant Group, overseeing branding and promotion for all 6 of his current establishments, plus 3 more opening in the coming year. "The compensation package includes equity," Andre explained. "I believe in team members being actual stakeholders in our success." The salary he mentioned exceeded her new position at Reynolds & Kline by a significant margin, but it was the nature of the work that truly captured Jasmine's interest. Rather than translating other people's visions into palatable urban campaigns, she would be building authentic narratives around culinary traditions and innovations that celebrated diverse cultures. "Our restaurants aren't just businesses," Andre continued. "They're cultural ambassadors. I want our marketing to reflect that purpose, to tell stories that honor traditions while creating new conversations." By the time their entrees arrived, Jasmine had moved from interested to enthusiastic. The position aligned perfectly with the aspects of marketing she found most meaningful without the exhausting code switching and microaggressions that had become routine in her corporate role. "I'd like to introduce you to the team," Andre said as they finished their meal. "Several of them are actually here today for our weekly leadership lunch. Would you join us for coffee?" Jasmine agreed readily and soon found herself at a larger table, surrounded by the diverse leadership team she had briefly met on Saturday night, now expanded to include several others. Natalie Johnson, Operations Director; David Kim, Beverage Director; Zoe Hernandez, Director of Guest Relations; Marcus Lee, Finance Director; and Eric Washington, Andre's younger brother, who handled real estate development. Unlike the stiff performance-oriented executive meetings at Reynolds & Kline, this gathering had the energy of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company while respecting each other's expertise. Ideas flowed freely, with junior team members comfortable challenging senior ones when appropriate. Jasmine observed how Andre led the discussion, guiding rather than dominating, asking incisive questions that clarified thinking and acknowledging good ideas regardless of their source. It was leadership that created space for others rather than diminishing them to enhance his own status. "We're launching a mentorship program for young culinary entrepreneurs," Zoe explained when Jasmine asked about their community initiatives, particularly focused on people of color who face barriers to traditional restaurant financing. "Sapphire was possible because one investor took a chance on me when 20 banks said no," Andre added. "We're trying to create more of those chances for others." As the meeting concluded, team members departed with genuine expressions of hope that Jasmine would join them. Andre walked her out to the street where her rideshare was waiting. "Take the weekend to think it over," he suggested. "This is a significant change, and I want you to be certain." Jasmine appreciated his consideration but found herself already certain. "I'll have a formal answer for you by Monday," she promised, "but I think you know which way I'm leaning." The following days passed in a blur of practical arrangements. A carefully worded resignation letter to Reynolds and Klein, which prompted a surprisingly generous counteroffer from Richardson once he realized she was serious. Cleaning out her desk, while colleagues alternated between congratulations and barely concealed envy. A tense exchange of apartment keys and personal belongings with Derek, who had pivoted from threats to unconvincing attempts at reconciliation. "You're making a huge mistake," he insisted, as he collected his things from her apartment. "The Blackwells have connections everywhere. You're burning bridges you don't even know exist." "I'm choosing which bridges matter," Jasmine replied simply. By Monday morning, when she called Andre to formally accept his offer, Jasmine felt lighter than she had in years, as though she had set down a heavy burden she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. The 2 months that followed brought transformative changes. Jasmine dove into her new role with energy that surprised even herself. Without the constant drain of navigating hostile spaces, she found reserves of creativity and strategic thinking that had previously been diverted to self-protection. Under her direction, the Washington Restaurant Group launched a campaign celebrating the cultural heritage behind each establishment, featuring the stories of staff members alongside the history of culinary traditions. The authentic approach resonated with audiences tired of corporate sanitization, generating significant press coverage and increased bookings. Andre proved to be the mentor and leader she had glimpsed during their first meeting, challenging without diminishing, supportive without micromanaging. The leadership team welcomed her expertise, incorporating her ideas, while providing the context she needed to succeed in an industry new to her. Perhaps most significantly, Jasmine found herself in a professional environment where her identity as a Black woman was an asset rather than an obstacle, where her perspectives were sought out rather than tolerated, where she could speak honestly without calculating the political cost of each word. The Azure Room at Sapphire underwent its own transformation. Andre implemented a clearly published dress code, emphasizing respect rather than conformity. "All who respect our establishment and fellow guests are welcome." The exclusive section maintained its luxury, while explicitly rejecting exclusion based on arbitrary judgments. 2 months to the day after their confrontation in the Azure Room, Jasmine encountered the Blackwells at a major charity fundraiser for Atlanta's arts programs. As a representative of the Washington Restaurant Group, now a significant sponsor, she couldn't avoid the interaction entirely. Eleanor Blackwell's face tightened upon seeing Jasmine approach their table with donation materials. "Miss Reed, what a surprise to see you here." Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Blackwell, Jasmine greeted them with professional courtesy. "The Washington Restaurant Group is proud to support Atlanta's arts education programs. We're announcing a culinary arts scholarship for underprivileged youth tonight." Richard Blackwell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yes, well, admirable initiative." The conversation remained painfully formal, both Blackwells clearly uncertain how to navigate this new power dynamic. Jasmine maintained her composure throughout, neither seeking their approval nor displaying any lingering resentment. As she moved to the next table, Eleanor called after her, "Miss Reed, I trust there are no hard feelings about our previous misunderstanding." Jasmine turned back with a measured smile. "None at all, Mrs. Blackwell. That evening was clarifying for all of us, I believe." The careful phrasing left Eleanor without a satisfying response, unable to claim either absolution or victimhood. It was a small victory, but Jasmine took quiet satisfaction in it nonetheless. Later that week, an unexpected message appeared in her professional inbox, an email from Derek requesting a meeting to discuss potential synergies between Meridian Capital and the Washington Restaurant Group. The transparent attempt to leverage their previous relationship for business advantage might once have made her question her judgment. Now it simply confirmed she had made the right choice. She forwarded the email to Andre with a simple note, Thoughts on how to proceed? His reply came within minutes. Your call entirely. Trust your instincts. Jasmine considered her response carefully before typing a polite but firm rejection. Thank you for your interest in the Washington Restaurant Group. At this time, we're focusing on partnerships aligned with our core values of community investment and authentic representation. We wish you continued success in your endeavors. Professional, clear, and final, like the closing of a chapter that had served its purpose but no longer fit the story she was writing. 6 months after that fateful night in the Azure Room, Sapphire hosted a private event celebrating the launch of the Washington Culinary Foundation, Andre's newest initiative providing mentorship, training, and startup funding for aspiring restaurateurs from underrepresented communities. As marketing director, Jasmine had been instrumental in shaping the foundation's public image and outreach strategy. The Azure Room had been transformed for the evening. The once rigidly formal space now hummed with diverse energy, community leaders, culinary students, established chefs, and investors mingling with easy confidence. The exclusive section that had once been a fortress of privilege now served as a bridge between worlds often kept separate. Jasmine moved through the crowd in a vibrant blue dress, coordinating last-minute details with her team while greeting guests. Her confidence was no longer the carefully constructed armor of her corporate days, but something more authentic, the assurance of someone whose work aligned with her values. Everything looks perfect, Andre said, joining her near the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Atlanta's glittering skyline. Your vision for tonight came together beautifully. Our vision, Jasmine corrected him with a smile. The team made it happen. In the 6 months since joining the Washington Restaurant Group, she had helped reshape its public image beyond excellent dining to become recognized for community impact and cultural celebration. Their marketing now told stories that honored culinary traditions while creating space for innovation narratives that resonated with authenticity rather than corporate calculation. Your parents are here, Andre noted, gesturing toward the entrance where Jasmine's mother and father were being welcomed by the maitre d'. Robert and Diana Reed had initially been skeptical of their daughter's career change. Leaving a prestigious corporate position for a restaurant group had seemed risky from their perspective, as lifelong educators who had emphasized traditional professional paths. Seeing her flourish in the new role had gradually converted their concern to support, though this was their first visit to Sapphire. Mom, Dad, Jasmine greeted them with warm hugs. Welcome to Sapphire. Diana Reed, elegant in a simple navy dress, surveyed the Azure Room with appraising eyes. So this is the famous restaurant we've heard so much about. The very one, Jasmine confirmed. Let me introduce you to Andre. As introductions were made and drinks served, Jasmine observed her parents with quiet joy. 6 months ago, they would have felt out of place in the Azure Room, subjected to the same subtle scrutiny she had experienced during her dinner with Derek. Tonight, they were honored guests treated with genuine respect rather than grudging tolerance. Mr. Reed, Mrs. Reed, I cannot express how valuable your daughter has been to our organization, Andre said with sincere appreciation. She's transformed our public engagement completely. Robert Reed nodded appreciatively. We always knew Jasmine would make her mark, though I admit the restaurant industry wasn't what we had imagined. It surprised me too, Jasmine acknowledged with a laugh. But it's been the most rewarding work of my career. As the formal program began, Jasmine took her place on the small stage alongside Andre and the foundation's newly appointed director, a former chef who had overcome significant obstacles to build his career. Andre's speech was brief but powerful, outlining the foundation's mission to address systemic barriers in the culinary world while celebrating diverse food traditions. When he introduced Jasmine to present the marketing strategy, the applause was genuine rather than perfunctory. Standing at the podium, Jasmine surveyed the room, filled with faces reflecting Atlanta's true diversity. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from ambitious marketing executive carefully navigating white spaces to a leader helping create new possibilities for others. The Washington Culinary Foundation isn't just about funding new restaurants, she explained to the attentive audience. It's about ensuring that the rich culinary traditions of all communities have the opportunity to thrive and evolve. It's about creating tables where everyone is truly welcome. The knowing smiles from those who understood the double meaning of her words, the literal restaurant tables and the metaphorical tables of power and opportunity, confirmed the shared vision that made this work meaningful. After the presentations concluded and guests began to mingle again, Jasmine was surprised to see Derek hovering near the entrance, looking both out of place and uncomfortable. He had lost weight since their breakup, his once immaculate suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. When their eyes met across the room, he offered a tentative wave. Her first instinct was irritation at his intrusion into this celebration. But the confidence of her new position allowed her to approach the situation with composure rather than defensiveness. "Derek," she acknowledged as she approached him. "This is unexpected." He shifted awkwardly, adjusting his tie. "Your security almost didn't let me in. I had to name drop you. Why are you here?" Jasmine asked, directly maintaining a professional tone despite their history. Derek glanced around at the vibrant crowd before answering. "Things haven't been great since. Everything. The Blackwell's connections weren't as valuable as I thought. Turns out Andre Washington has more influence in Atlanta's business circles than I realized." "That's not an answer to my question," Jasmine noted, unwilling to fall into the familiar pattern of managing his emotions. "I thought maybe we could talk," he admitted. "About us. About what happened. I've been doing some thinking and maybe I didn't handle things as well as I could have." The non-apology was so characteristic that Jasmine almost smiled. 6 months ago, she might have accepted this half measure, might have worked to smooth things over and make him comfortable at her own expense. "Derek," she said, gently but firmly, "there is no US to discuss. I wish you well, but that chapter of my life is closed." His expression hardened slightly. "Just like that. 2 years together and you're done." "It ended the night you chose social climbing over basic human dignity," Jasmine replied. "But I'm not angry anymore. This work, these people," she gestured toward the room behind her, "they've shown me what authentic success looks like. It's not about fitting into exclusive spaces. It's about creating better ones." Derek seemed to truly see her for perhaps the first time, taking in the confidence and clarity that had replaced her former careful calculations. "You've changed," he said, sounding slightly bewildered. "I stopped changing myself to fit places that were never designed for me," Jasmine corrected him. "There's a difference." Before Derek could respond, Andre approached with Jasmine's parents. "Everything all right here?" Andre asked, his tone casual but his eyes alert. "Everything's fine," Jasmine assured him. Derek was just leaving. Derek looked between them, finally recognizing the new reality. With a stiff nod, he turned and exited through the heavy glass doors, a stark contrast to his triumphant entrance with Jasmine 6 months earlier. Old friend Andre asked diplomatically once Derek had gone. "Old lesson," Jasmine replied with a slight smile. Diana Reed linked her arm through her daughter's. "Well, I think we've learned quite enough about your ex-boyfriend from that brief interaction. Now tell me more about this mentorship program you mentioned." The remainder of the evening unfolded with joyful purpose. Watching her parents engage with her colleagues, seeing the excited culinary students receiving their foundation scholarships, observing Andre moving through the room with the same authentic presence, whether speaking to wealthy donors or kitchen staff, all of it confirmed for Jasmine that she had found her place. As the event wound down, she found herself back at the window wall, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline. Andre joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. To new beginnings, he offered, handing her one. And to lessons learned, Jasmine added, clinking her glass against his. "Speaking of lessons," Andre said, "I'm hoping you'll take an expanded role with the foundation. Your marketing expertise has been invaluable, but your perspective on navigating professional barriers offers something equally important to our mentees." The request touched Jasmine deeply. "I'd be honored, though I'm still learning myself." "That's precisely what makes you the right person," Andre replied. "Success isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask better questions." As the final guests departed and the staff began their cleanup routine, Jasmine gathered her team for a brief celebration of their successful event. The diverse group of marketing professionals she had hired over the past months represented her commitment to creating opportunities similar to those Andre had offered her. Her parents waited patiently, clearly proud of the leadership role their daughter had assumed. When she finally joined them for their ride back to her apartment, her father squeezed her hand. "You found your path," he said simply. With some unexpected detours, Jasmine acknowledged with a smile. Diana Reed shook her head slightly. "The detours are the path, sweetheart. That's how you know it's yours, and not someone else's." Later that night, after her parents had settled into her guest room, Jasmine stood on her apartment balcony, considering how dramatically her life had changed in 6 months. From the ambitious executive, carefully navigating white spaces, to a leader helping create environments where others could bring their full selves to work. The journey hadn't been without challenges. There had been sleepless nights questioning her decision, moments of doubt when familiar corporate paths seemed safer than this new direction. But those uncertainties had gradually been replaced by the conviction that comes from alignment between values and actions. The Azure Room itself stood as a tangible symbol of this transformation. The exclusive space that had once rejected Andre based on his appearance now displayed a framed statement by the entrance, "All who respect others are welcome." The same elegant environment remained, but the arbitrary barriers had been removed, creating room for authentic connections rather than performances of status. Tomorrow, Jasmine would begin preparations for the Foundation's next initiative, a series of pop-up dining experiences showcasing cuisines and chefs from historically overlooked communities. The work ahead would be challenging, but meaningful, filled with purpose beyond professional advancement or financial success. As she looked out over the city lights, Jasmine reflected on Andre's words from their first real conversation, "The tax never ends." The observation had been accurate, but incomplete. While the burden of navigating spaces designed to exclude remained a reality, she had discovered something equally true: the possibility of creating new spaces, of transforming existing ones, of building tables rather than fighting for seats at those controlled by others. It wasn't an endpoint, but a beginning, not just for her career, but for the communities touched by their work. The real power wasn't in gaining access to exclusive rooms, but in reimagining what those rooms could become when truly open to all who deserve to be there. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Would you have had the courage to stand up for what's right, even if it meant risking your career? Drop a comment below, sharing your thoughts if this story resonated with you. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of people overcoming discrimination and finding their authentic path. Your support helps us continue sharing these important narratives that need to be heard. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself, unapologetically, in spaces where others try to diminish your light. This story reveals powerful truths about racism in seemingly exclusive spaces and the courage required to stand against it. Jasmine's journey teaches us that true success isn't measured by accessing privileged rooms, but by creating environments where everyone belongs authentically. The black tax, the exhausting work of code switching and making others comfortable, comes at a tremendous personal cost that many never see or acknowledge. We learn that wealth and achievement don't shield people of color from discrimination, as Andre's experience proves. Most importantly, the story demonstrates that meaningful change requires both personal courage and collective action. By choosing integrity over comfort, Jasmine and Andre transform exclusionary spaces into inclusive ones, showing that real power lies not in fitting into broken systems, but in reimagining and rebuilding them. The hardest battles are often fought in everyday moments: a dinner, a meeting, a casual comment, where staying silent feels safer than speaking up. Yet these small choices shape who we become and the world we create together. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in exclusive spaces? How did you respond? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story about overcoming racial barriers resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives that need to be heard. Don't forget to share with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for watching, and remember that your voice matters most in the moments when speaking up feels hardest.